Living alone in the woods can be intimidating to a lot of people. I'm sure there are many who'd find it difficult to be removed from technology and placed into isolation. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with technology or enjoying it. Far from it, actually. It has made life so much easier, and that can often be a good thing at times. All I'm trying to say is living in the mountains or wilderness isn't the easiest of lives to live, but it can be very rewarding and enjoyable for the right person. Hell, when I was younger, I was always excited to see new technology being developed. Smartphones and video games. I always had to have the newest and sleekest thing. That was my life from my childhood right up through high school. Then, after getting a dead-end job punching in numbers on a keyboard, getting berated from one supervisor to the next, I decided it was time for a change. My friends and family told me I was insane for going through with this. Some even remarked that I wouldn't last very long and come crawling back to civilization. They all acted like I was just going to wander into the woods and live in a tree or something. Quite the contrary. I'd found a cabin for sale up north. Although it was quite basic, it was exactly what I was looking for. Something I could make my own and not have to worry about other people getting in my way. Though I was planning on living far out in the woods, I wasn't going to be totally cut off from the world. There was a very small town not too far away from my cabin. It had a single gas station and a few shops here and there. Those shops are actually where I earn most of my money now. I do some odd jobs for them and the pay is more than enough for me to get by on. The rest of my needs I get from nature itself. I use a wood-burning stove for heat and cooking. I have a small generator which provides some power to lights in my fridge, but that's it. Half the time I don't even use my lights. Instead, I just use oil lanterns. For water, I'd have to haul it from a stream in the woods or collect rain and then boil it. For food, I'd either have to hunt it or purchase what I needed from one of the shops in town. The first week living there, it was a major shock to my system. Going from being a cubicle monkey to immediately roughing it in the woods, and you realize pretty quickly just how different things are. Luckily, my support structure wasn't all negative. My father, who had been an avid outdoorsman for a good portion of his life, gave me a lot of tips and advice regarding the matter. He had been very supportive, even if it stemmed from a cliched point of view. He'd often visit me once a month just to enjoy the simpler life, as he put it. By the end of the first year living there, I felt like I'd come into my own. I'd figured out what I needed to do to live comfortably. Don't get me wrong, I've also had many mistakes along the way. I almost burned down the entire cabin twice, and nearly had a tree fall on me. Though overall, I was very happy with my decision to move out here. That was until a few days ago. The day began and ended as if it were just another day of the week. I had gotten up and started a fire in my stove to provide some much needed warmth. I ate breakfast and spent the morning chopping wood and gathering water. After that, I drove into town and helped out Jim at the store for a bit before heading back home. As I drove along the trail back to my cabin, the autumn sun had set, which made driving a tad more difficult. I kept a close eye on the road in front of me, and after a few minutes I arrived. I unloaded some supplies I had picked up and spent the evening making dinner. I had gone to bed at roughly 10 p.m. About an hour or so later, I was startled awake by a noise echoing throughout my cabin. Someone had knocked on my door. I sat up in bed wondering if I had simply dreamt the noise. I waited in the pitch dark of my bedroom, groggily listening. Then it sounded again. The knocks carried throughout my darkened cabin. I got out of bed and quickly put on some clothes. After I got dressed, I knelt down next to my bed and retrieved my shotgun. This might seem odd to you, but in my entire year of living out in the woods, I never had a visitor aside from people whom I knew was coming. I especially never had someone knock on my door at this late at night before. Before I walked over to my door, I tried to psych myself up by taking a few deep breaths. Odds were that it was probably just some camper or something who had simply gotten lost and was looking for help. As I approached my door, though, I couldn't help but feel a bit of apprehension growing in the back of my mind. I was only a few feet away from my door, and I already could tell something was strange. Usually someone who needed help would continuously knock on a door or be saying something. There had been no further indication since I had entered my living room. I began to think that whoever it was must have thought nobody was home and moved on. I took a few more steps towards my door and waited. I was just about to turn around and head back to bed when 3 more knocks sounded against my door. Hearing this, I took a step back. Warning alarms were echoing loudly in my head. While I didn't know who it could be, I knew that no normal person would just be silently standing outside in the cold and knocking at random intervals. I clutched my shotgun in my hand and walked over to the only window overlooking my front yard area. I tried my best to crane my neck to see towards the front door. Although it was dark out, the clear moonlit sky provided just enough light for me to see. There was nothing standing in front of my door. I scanned around the area to see if there were any signs of anybody walking around, and there were none. I rubbed my tired eyes and began walking back to bed. About halfway to my bedroom, 3 more knocks echoed. This time they were much harder than before, as if whoever was on the other side was beginning to strike the door with force. Hearing this, it made me spin on my heels with my shotgun at the ready. Another 3 knocks shook the door violently. I could feel my hands start to tremble as I stared with wide eyes. I wasn't sure who was outside my door, and I wasn't sure what to do. Then it happened. The next impact that struck my door sent the door opening inward. I stared in disbelief at what was on the other side. It was tall. Taller than my doorframe. It raised a gangly hand with bony fingers and gripped the inside of the door. Kneeling down, it lowered its head to my level. The first thing I noticed were the eyes. They were enormous, like those alien depictions you see everywhere. Gaunt cheeks tapered its face to a pointed chin. It didn't seem to have a mouth. Well, as far as I could tell. It was now crouched in my doorframe and trying to enter my home. I could feel my hands beginning to stiffen up. They gripped the shotgun tighter and tighter, until inevitably, it went off. The sudden noise sent a ringing in my ears. A brief flash of light filled the room, followed closely by the smoke from the blast. When the smoke cleared, that thing that had been standing in my doorway was nowhere to be seen. What I could see, however, was my truck sitting a few yards away. I cautiously stepped towards my door. I peeked my head out and looked around. There was no sign of whatever that was. Seeing an opportunity before me, I darted across the uneven ground and jumped into my truck. I started it up, and when the headlights came on, I could see it. It was standing on the roof of my cabin. It looked like some eerie statue at first glance. I quickly put my truck in reverse and turned around. I pulled onto the trail and floored the gas pedal. My truck bounced and rattled endlessly as I drove. Eventually, I skidded out onto the main road, nearly crashing in the process. I drove towards the gas station, which thankfully stays open rather late. I dashed inside and demanded to use the phone. The clerk, a teenager by the name of Jason, whom I've met a few months before, shot me a look of panicked confusion. He handed me the phone and I immediately dialed 911. It took the police nearly an hour to reach me. After spending another 30 minutes explaining to them that someone had tried to break into my cabin, we finally went there to investigate. I sat in my truck nearby as the officers examined the surrounding area with flashlights. After a few moments, they told me there was no sign of anyone or anything in my cabin or nearby. They told me they'd file a report and to call them if anything happens. Reluctantly, I thanked them and they left. Once they did, I ran inside, grabbed a few of my essentials, and headed out myself. I stayed the night at my parents' house about an hour away. They were both equally surprised to find me sleeping on their couch when they got up. I explained to them that somebody had tried to break into my cabin, and they both shared looks of concern. The next day, I went back to the cabin to look around more closely. I didn't find much out of place. Just a splintered door and some holes in the wood from my shotgun. I always thought living the simpler life would be much more enjoyable than my mundane life in the city. But as I stared at the massive elongated footprints pressed into the mud that led off into the woods, I'm starting to think that working in an office wasn't so bad after all.